The latch clicked softly as Ivy Brennan slipped the bolt into place, sealing the Modiste shop from the dawn-grey street outside. Her fingers trembled as she turned toward the corner where the old woman sat, spine curved against the brick wall, eyes distant and unfocused beneath a tangle of white hair. 3 weeks now. 3 weeks of arriving before sunrise. 3 weeks of smuggling bread and warm broth past the other shopkeepers who muttered about that creature ruining their respectable lane. 3 weeks of fear coiling in Ivy's stomach each time Mr. Dalton, the shop's owner, made his weekly inspection. "Come," Ivy whispered, extending her hand toward the woman who never spoke, never asked, never even acknowledged the world around her. "Just for a little while before anyone sees." The woman's fingers were cold when they found Ivy's palm. She stood with the mechanical stiffness of someone whose body had forgotten comfort, and Ivy guided her through the shop's narrow back entrance, into the workroom where morning light barely penetrated. Ivy had hidden a small kettle behind the fabric bolts. She'd stolen moments between customers yesterday to prepare the broth, ladling it into a jar she could reheat quickly over the single candle she kept burning in the storage room. It wasn't much. It was never enough. But the woman's hollow cheeks had begun to fill just slightly, and that felt like something Ivy could not abandon. "Here." Ivy pressed the warm cup into the woman's hands, guiding them upward when the old fingers forgot their purpose. "Drink slowly." The woman's eyes flickered toward Ivy's face, just for a heartbeat, and something passed between them that Ivy could not name. Gratitude, perhaps, or recognition of a kindness the world had long since stopped offering. The church bells struck 5. Ivy had 30 minutes before the lane would wake, before Mrs. Colburn from the stationery shop would peer through her curtains with suspicious eyes, before young Timothy from the bakery would start his deliveries and notice the old woman was no longer slumped outside. Ivy worked quickly, helping the woman eat a piece of bread, wiping the crumbs from her weathered chin with the same gentle care she used with her son when he was small and learning to feed himself. The comparison made her chest tighten. Liam was 8 now, old enough to understand why his mother left their rented room before dawn, old enough to worry when she came home with shadows beneath her eyes. "I don't know who you are," Ivy murmured as she cleaned the cup and tucked it back into its hiding place. "I don't know why you came here, but I can't let you starve." The woman said nothing. She never did. Ivy guided her back toward the door, her heart hammering as she checked the street. Empty still. She helped the woman settle back into her corner, arranging her threadbare shawl as best she could. "I'll see you tomorrow," Ivy whispered, though she knew no answer would come. She retreated inside, her hands shaking as she lit the lamps and began arranging the ribbon display Mr. Dalton insisted be impeccable at all times. The fear never left her. Every customer who entered could be the one who reported her. Every glance toward the window could reveal someone watching, judging, preparing to strip away the fragile security she'd fought 3 years to build. Ivy's husband had been dead 4 years. The fever took him in less than a week, leaving her with a 3-month lease on a room she could not afford, and a 4-year-old son who did not understand why Papa would not come home. Mr. Dalton had hired her because his wife pitied her, because Ivy had once sewn her daughter's wedding dress, because the alternative was watching a widow and child sink into the workhouse. She could not lose this position. She could not. But every morning, when that old woman appeared, silent and forgotten, Ivy could not walk past her either. The day progressed with agonizing slowness. Customers came and went, ladies selecting lace, servants collecting mended gloves, a young bride hesitating over satin ribbon for her trousseau. Ivy smiled, measured, wrapped purchases in brown paper with precise folds, and every spare moment, her eyes flickered to the window, to the old woman still sitting outside, unmoving as a statue. At 2:30, the bell above the door chimed. A woman swept inside, her police fine, but her expression harried. "I need thread," she announced breathlessly. "The lavender shade. I've run out and my embroidery is half finished." "Of course, madam." Ivy moved toward the thread cabinet, grateful for the distraction from her spiraling anxiety. But the woman followed too closely, her eyes darting around the shop with an odd intensity. "You open quite early, don't you?" Ivy's pulse stuttered. "Mr. Dalton prefers we maintain consistent hours." "I see." The woman's gaze lingered on the workroom door. "I thought I might come earlier tomorrow. I have several projects that require attention." "We open at 6, madam." "Earlier than that, perhaps?" The woman's smile did not reach her eyes. "I'm an early riser. I often walk this lane before dawn." The words landed like stones in Ivy's chest. She forced her hands to remain steady as she wrapped the thread, forced her voice to remain calm. "I'm afraid Mr. Dalton does not permit entry before 6. The woman paid and left, her steps quick and purposeful. Ivy's hands clenched around the counter edge, her breath coming shallow and fast. She'd been seen. She was certain of it. The rest of the afternoon crawled past. Ivy locked the shop at precisely 6 as required, and walked the 15 minutes to her lodging, with her shoulders tight and her mind racing through every possible disaster. Mr. Dalton would dismiss her. She would lose the room. She and Liam would have nowhere to go. But when she arrived home, Liam was waiting with his lopsided smile and a drawing he'd made of a horse, and Ivy pushed her fear into a corner of her mind where it could not touch him. "Mama, can we have stew tonight?" "Yes, love." She kissed his forehead, breathing in the scent of soap and little boy sweetness. "We can." That night, she barely slept, and when dawn came, she rose in the darkness and walked back to the shop, her heart a drumbeat of dread and determination. The old woman was already there, waiting. Ivy unlocked the door, glancing up and down the street, empty, silent. She reached for the woman's hand. "Stop!" The voice cracked through the morning air like a whip. Ivy spun, her heart slamming against her ribs. A man stood 10 paces away, his greatcoat billowing behind him, his face carved from fury and something darker. He strode forward with the kind of authority that made the cobblestones themselves seem to yield beneath his boots. "Step away from her," he commanded, his voice low and lethal. "Now." Ivy's mind blanked with terror, but her body moved instinctively, placing herself between the man and the old woman. "She's done nothing wrong." "Nothing wrong?" The man's laugh was blade sharp. "Do you have any idea who she is, what you've been doing?" "I've been feeding her," Ivy shot back, her fear crystallizing into anger. "Which is more than anyone else has bothered to do." He closed the distance between them in 3 strides, towering over her with barely leashed rage. "You've been exploiting her, using her for what? Sympathy? Charity donations?" The accusation struck like a slap. "How dare you? How dare I?" His eyes, dark as midnight, furious as storms, bore into hers. "She's been missing for 3 weeks. 3 weeks while you've kept her here like some prop for your own purposes. I didn't keep her anywhere." Ivy's voice rose despite the danger of drawing attention. "She appeared outside this shop weeks ago and no one else cared that she was starving. You had no right. She's a human being." The words tore from Ivy's throat. "She deserves to be treated like one." The man's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking beneath his skin. He looked past Ivy to the old woman, and something in his expression shifted, softened just enough to reveal a fracture beneath the fury. "Come, grandmother," he said, his voice dropping to something gentler, almost broken. "Let's go home." The word struck Ivy like a physical blow. Grandmother. The old woman did not move. The man crouched beside her, his large hands careful as they touched her shoulder. "It's Nathaniel. I've been looking for you. Please." Nothing. The woman's eyes remained distant, unfocused, as though she inhabited a world no one else could reach. Nathaniel stood, his jaw tight. He turned back to Ivy and she saw it now. Beneath the anger, beneath the accusations, there was fear, raw and unmistakable. "If you've harmed her in any way—" "I fed her," Ivy interrupted, her voice steady, despite her racing heart. "I gave her water and shelter and basic human kindness. If that's a crime, then condemn me for it." Their eyes locked. The street around them remained silent, the world holding its breath. Finally, Nathaniel bent and lifted the old woman into his arms with surprising tenderness. She did not resist, but neither did she acknowledge him. He carried her toward a carriage Ivy had not noticed, emblazoned with a crest she could not read in the dim light. He paused at the carriage door, looking back at her with an expression Ivy could not decipher. "You should have sent word. To someone. Anyone." "To whom?" Ivy asked quietly. She never spoke. And no one asked. Something flickered across his face. Guilt, perhaps, or shame, but he said nothing more. He placed the old woman inside the carriage, climbed in after her, and the driver snapped the reins. Ivy stood alone in the empty street as the carriage disappeared into the morning mist, her hands still trembling, her heart still racing. She did not know who the man was. She did not know what would happen next, but she knew with bone-deep certainty that her life had just shifted beneath her feet. And she had no idea if she would survive the fall. The shop felt different that day. Ivy moved through her tasks mechanically, measuring ribbon and folding fabric, but her mind remained locked on the fury in that man's eyes, the accusations in his voice, the tenderness with which he'd lifted the old woman who would not speak. Grandmother, he'd called her. 3 weeks. The woman had been missing for 3 weeks, and no one had found her until now. What kind of family lost someone for that long? Mrs. Colburn entered at noon, her thin lips pursed with barely contained glee. Such excitement this morning, my dear. A ducal carriage on our lane. Can you imagine? Ivy's stomach dropped. A duke? The Duke of Ravenscroft himself, or so Timothy said. Apparently, one of his servants saw him arrive just after dawn. Mrs. Colburn leaned across the counter conspiratorially. Whatever could bring such a man to our humble street? Ivy's hands went cold. A duke. She'd argued with a duke. She'd placed herself between a duke and his grandmother and accused him of not caring whether the woman starved. I'm sure I don't know, Ivy managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Colburn prattled on, but Ivy heard nothing. Her world had narrowed to a single terrifying realization. She had made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in England. By the time she closed the shop that evening, her hands would not stop shaking. She walked home in a daze, her mind cataloguing every possible consequence. He could ruin her with a word. He could have her blacklisted from every shop in the city. He could... Mama! Liam's voice cut through her spiral. He was waiting at the top of the stairs, his face bright with excitement. Mrs. Hewitt made apple tarts and gave me one. Ivy pulled him close, breathing in his warmth, letting his uncomplicated joy steady her. That was kind of her. She said I was a good boy for helping carry her basket. He beamed up at her. Was I? You were. She kissed his forehead. You are. That night she lay awake long after Liam had fallen asleep beside her in their narrow bed. She stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine what tomorrow would bring. Would the Duke of Ravenscroft send constables to arrest her? Would he speak to Mr. Dalton and have her dismissed? Would he simply forget her, a shop girl too insignificant to warrant further attention? She did not know which possibility frightened her most. When dawn came, Ivy rose on shaking legs and dressed in the darkness. She kissed Liam's sleeping forehead and walked to the shop, half expecting to find it barred or marked with some sign of her disgrace. Instead, she found the Duke of Ravenscroft waiting outside the door. He stood in the grey morning light, his greatcoat immaculate, his expression unreadable. When he saw her, he straightened, and Ivy's heart climbed into her throat. Miss, he paused. I don't know your name. Brennan, Ivy said quietly. Ivy Brennan. Mrs. His eyebrows rose slightly. Mrs. Brennan, I owe you an apology. The words were so unexpected that Ivy nearly stumbled. Your Grace, I spoke harshly yesterday. I accused you of things you did not do. He met her eyes and she saw something there she had not seen before. Genuine remorse. My grandmother has been missing for 3 weeks. I have had men searching every corner of London. When I learned she was here, I assumed... He stopped, jaw tightening. I assumed the worst. I should not have. Ivy's mind reeled. You don't need to apologize to me, Your Grace. I'm no one. You are someone who cared for my grandmother when no one else did. His voice was firm. That is not nothing. Silence stretched between them. Ivy became aware of how early it was, how alone they were, how improper this entire situation was becoming. How is she? The question slipped out before Ivy could stop it. Your grandmother. Is she eating? The Duke's expression darkened. No. The single word carried the weight of helplessness and desperation. Since I brought her home, she has refused every meal. She will not eat, will not drink, will barely move from her bed. He looked away toward the horizon where dawn was beginning to break. I have physicians attending her. They can find nothing physically wrong. But she is fading, Mrs. Brennan, and I do not know how to stop it." Something in Ivy's chest cracked at the raw honesty in his voice. This was not a duke speaking. This was a man watching someone he loved slip away. "She wouldn't speak when she was here either," Ivy said softly. "But she ate when I offered food gently, without pressure, just as though it were a simple kindness, not a duty. I don't know how to do that." The admission seemed to cost him something. "I was raised to command, not to coax." Ivy thought of Liam, of the patience required to help a grieving child remember how to smile. Sometimes the smallest gestures matter most. The Duke looked at her then, really looked, as though seeing her for the first time. "Would you come?" he asked abruptly. "To my estate, to see if she will eat for you." Every instinct in Ivy's body screamed refusal. Going to a duke's estate, alone, without protection or propriety, it was unthinkable. But she thought of the old woman's hollow eyes, of the way her cold fingers had gripped Ivy's hand, of the terrible loneliness that hung around her like a shroud. "I have responsibilities here," Ivy said carefully. "My employer. I will speak to him. Your Grace, I don't think... Please." The word was simple, unadorned, stripped of all ducal authority. "I am asking you, please." Ivy's resolve crumbled. "One visit," she said quietly. "I'll come once, but I can make no promises." Relief washed across his face so clearly that Ivy's breath caught. "Thank you." He arranged everything with swift efficiency, spoke to a bewildered Mr. Dalton, sent word to Ivy's landlady that she would be gone for the day, provided a carriage that made Mrs. Colburn's eyes nearly popped from her skull when it arrived to collect Ivy at noon. And Ivy, who had never been inside anything finer than Mr. Dalton's shop, found herself seated across from the Duke of Ravenscroft as they rolled through London's streets toward an estate she could not begin to imagine. "My grandmother has not spoken in 3 years," the Duke said quietly as the carriage swayed. "The physicians call it a melancholy of the mind. She understands, I think. But the words will not come." "That must be frightening for her," Ivy murmured. "Yes." He looked out the window. "I believe it is. And for you." His eyes snapped back to hers, surprise flickering across his face. "I am not the one suffering." "You're watching someone you love disappear," Ivy said gently. "That's a different kind of suffering. But it's still real." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor he wore so carefully. "You speak as though you understand. I watched my husband die of fever 4 years ago." The words came easier now, softened by time but never painless. "I couldn't stop it. I couldn't save him. I could only sit beside him and hold his hand while he faded. I'm sorry." "So am I." Ivy looked down at her work-roughened hands. "But it taught me that sometimes being present is the only gift we have to offer." The carriage rolled on in silence, carrying them toward a future neither could predict. Ravenscroft Manor rose from the countryside like something out of a dream, all golden stone and towering windows, gardens manicured with mathematical precision, a fountain in the circular drive that probably cost more than Ivy would earn in a lifetime. She felt small stepping from the carriage, smaller still when a butler appeared and bowed as though she were someone important, rather than a shop girl in a borrowed pelisse. "This way, Mrs. Brennan," the Duke said, guiding her through doors that opened into a foyer 3 times the size of her entire lodging. Ivy forced herself to breathe. This was temporary. She was here for the old woman, nothing more. They climbed a sweeping staircase, walked down a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, and stopped before a door guarded by a worried-looking maid. "How is she, Marjorie?" the Duke asked. "The same, Your Grace. Won't eat, won't speak, barely opens her eyes." The Duke's jaw tightened. He pushed open the door, and Ivy followed him into a room that smelled of lavender and sickness. The old woman lay in a bed that seemed to swallow her whole. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow, her hands limp atop the coverlet. "Grandmother," the Duke said softly. "I've brought someone to see you." No response. The woman might have been carved from wax. Ivy moved forward slowly, her heart aching at how much more fragile the woman looked here, in this grand bed than she had sitting outside the shop. "Hello," Ivy said quietly. "It's me. From the shop." I've been worried about you." "Nothing." Ivy glanced at the Duke. He gestured toward a tray on the bedside table. Untouched broth, untouched bread, untouched tea. Ivy picked up the bowl of broth and sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "I brought you food every morning," she said, keeping her voice gentle and unhurried. "Do you remember? You never asked for it, but I thought you might be hungry." The old woman's eyelids fluttered. Just slightly, but it was movement. Ivy dipped the spoon into the broth and lifted it toward the woman's lips. "You don't have to eat if you don't want to, but I think you might feel better if you did." The woman's mouth opened. Just a fraction. Just enough. Ivy tipped the spoon carefully, and the woman swallowed. Behind her, Ivy heard the Duke's sharp intake of breath. She offered another spoonful. Another. Slowly, patiently, as though they had all the time in the world. The old woman ate half the bowl before her eyes drifted closed again, exhausted by the effort. Ivy set the bowl aside and stood. The Duke was staring at her as though she'd performed a miracle. "How did you do that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't do anything," Ivy said. "I just treated her like a person, not a problem to be solved." The Duke's expression was unreadable. "Will you stay? Just for a little while to see if she'll eat again?" Ivy thought of Liam, waiting at home, of the shop, of the dozens of reasons she should refuse. But the old woman's fingers had moved just slightly toward Ivy's hand before she fell back asleep, and Ivy could not ignore that silent plea. "A little while," she agreed. "But then I must go home." Of course. The Duke arranged for tea to be brought, for a chair to be placed by the window where Ivy could sit comfortably. He hovered uncertainly, as though unsure whether to stay or leave. "You can go," Ivy said gently. "I'll call if she wakes." He nodded and left, though his steps were reluctant. Ivy sat in the chair and watched the old woman sleep, her mind spinning with questions she had no right to ask. What had happened 3 weeks ago? How had a Duke's grandmother ended up lost and alone on a modiste shop's doorstep? Why had no one found her sooner? An hour later, the old woman stirred. Ivy returned to her side immediately, offering water this time. The woman drank, her eyes focusing briefly on Ivy's face with something that might have been gratitude. "You're safe now," Ivy murmured. "You're home." The woman's lips moved, shaping a word that did not come. Her eyes filled with something that looked like frustration, or perhaps sorrow. "It's all right," Ivy soothed. "You don't have to speak. I'm here." When the Duke returned an hour later, the old woman had eaten more broth and drunk an entire cup of water. He stared at the empty dishes as though they were evidence of sorcery. "I should go home now," Ivy said quietly. "My son will be worried." "Your son?" "Liam. He's 8. Ivy stood, smoothing her skirts. "I left him with our landlady, but he doesn't like when I'm gone too long." The Duke nodded slowly. "Of course. I'll have the carriage take you." He paused. "Thank you, Mrs. Brennan. Truly. I'm glad I could help." But as the carriage carried her back toward London, Ivy could not shake the image of the old woman's eyes, lost and lonely, and so desperately in need of something Ivy was not sure anyone could provide. She did not expect to see the Duke of Ravenscroft again. 2 days later, he appeared at the shop once more. Ivy was measuring lace for a customer when the bell chimed and the Duke strode inside as though he owned the place. Every head in the shop turned. The customer Ivy was serving forgot how to speak. "Mrs. Brennan," the Duke said, his voice tight with barely controlled urgency, "I need to speak with you. Privately." Mr. Dalton materialized from the back room, his face pale. "Your Grace, how may we—" "Not you." The Duke's eyes remained fixed on Ivy. Her. There was no refusing. Ivy excused herself and followed the Duke outside, her heart hammering. "She won't eat again," he said without preamble. "She hasn't taken a bite since you left. She barely opens her eyes. The physicians say if she doesn't eat soon—" He stopped, his jaw clenched so tightly Ivy feared his teeth might crack. "I'm so sorry," Ivy said helplessly, "but I don't know what else I can do." "Stay." The word was a command and a plea. "Come to the estate, stay for a month, I'll pay you whatever you need, just please help her. Your Grace, I have a son. I have responsibilities." "Bring him." Ivy's breath caught. "What?" Bring your son. Both of you can stay. I'll make sure you have everything you need, rooms, food, security. His eyes bore into hers. I'm asking you to save my grandmother's life, Mrs. Brennan. Name your price. The offer was absurd, impossible. Everything about this situation violated every rule of propriety and common sense Ivy had ever learned. But the desperation in his voice was real, and the memory of the old woman's hollow eyes haunted her. I don't want money, Ivy said slowly. I want security, a position, something permanent, so I don't have to fear losing everything if I leave the shop. Done? The Duke's answer was immediate. You'll be my grandmother's companion, a permanent position with lodging and salary for as long as you wish it. And my son. He'll have a place, education if you want it, safety. The Duke's voice softened. I swear to you, Mrs. Brennan, I will see you both cared for. Ivy thought of the cramped room where she and Liam slept, of the constant fear that one mistake would leave them homeless, of the old woman who had no one else. All right, she whispered. We'll come. Relief crashed across the Duke's face so powerfully that Ivy almost reached out to steady him. Thank you, he said hoarsely. Thank you. He arranged everything within hours, spoke to Mr. Dalton, paid Ivy's rent through the end of the year in case she wished to return, sent a carriage to collect her and Liam and their few belongings before sunset. Liam's eyes were enormous as he climbed into the carriage. Mama, is this real? I think so, love. Ivy pulled him close, her own heart racing with equal parts hope and terror. I think so. They arrived at Ravenscroft Manor as darkness fell. Servants appeared to carry their bags, all 2 of them, and the Duke himself met them at the door. His eyes fell on Liam, who shrank against Ivy's side. You must be Liam. Liam nodded mutely. I'm glad you're here. The Duke crouched down, meeting Liam at eye level. Your mother is helping someone very important to me. That makes you important too. Something in Ivy's chest cracked at the unexpected gentleness in his voice. The housekeeper will show you to your rooms, the Duke continued, rising. They're in the family wing. I thought it would be easier for you to access my grandmother's chamber. Ivy blinked. The family wing? You're not servants, Mrs. Brennan. You're guests. He said it as though it were obvious, as though inviting a shop girl and her son into the family's private quarters was perfectly normal. The rooms were larger than the entire place Ivy and Liam had been living. 2 bedchambers connected by a sitting room, each with a fireplace and windows overlooking gardens that gleamed silver in the moonlight. Liam ran from room to room, his delighted laughter echoing off the walls. Mama, look, I have my own bed and it's huge. Ivy stood in the center of the sitting room and tried to remember how to breathe. This was temporary, she reminded herself. This would end. She could not allow herself to believe otherwise. But when she tucked Liam into his enormous bed that night, and he looked up at her with trust shining in his eyes, she felt the first whisper of hope that perhaps, somehow, they might finally be safe. The next morning, Ivy woke before dawn from habit and went to the old woman's room. The Duke was already there, sitting in the chair Ivy had occupied 2 days ago, his head bowed as though in prayer. Your Grace? Ivy said softly. He looked up, his face haggard with exhaustion. She won't wake, I've tried, his voice broke. I don't know what else to do. Ivy moved to the bedside and took the old woman's hand. It was cold, the pulse beneath her skin fluttering like a trapped bird. Talk to her, Ivy said quietly. Tell her you're here. Tell her she matters. She knows. Does she? Ivy met his eyes. When was the last time you told her? The Duke's face shuttered. I don't. That's not how we. Then learn. Ivy's voice was firm, because I think she needs to hear it. She left him alone with his grandmother and went to wake Liam, her heart aching for the man who commanded so much, but understood so little about the language of love. When she returned an hour later with breakfast, the old woman's eyes were open. She was eating from a bowl the Duke held, his hands shaking slightly, his voice a low murmur Ivy could not quite hear. He looked up when Ivy entered, and the gratitude in his eyes stole her breath. Thank you, he mouthed. Ivy nodded, her throat too tight for words. And in that moment, standing in a Duke's manor with her threadbare shawl and her rough hands and her impossible situation, Ivy realized that her life had just changed in ways she could never undo. She did not yet know if that change would save her or destroy her, but there was no going back. The days fell into a rhythm that felt both surreal and strangely natural. Ivy woke with the dawn, checked on the old woman, whom the Duke had finally introduced as Dowager Duchess Catherine, and coaxed her to eat breakfast. Slowly, carefully, with the same patience Ivy had learned as a mother. Catherine never spoke, but her eyes began to track Ivy's movements, and sometimes her lips would curve into something that might have been a smile. Liam, for his part, adapted with the resilience of childhood. He explored the gardens with wide-eyed wonder, made friends with the kitchen cat, and peppered Ivy with endless questions about the big house and the serious man. The serious man, the Duke, watched them both with an intensity that made Ivy's skin prickle. He was present far more than she'd expected for a man of his station. He ate breakfast with his grandmother each morning, sat with her in the afternoons, read to her in the evenings, even though she never responded. And he watched Ivy. Not unkindly, but with a focus that suggested he was trying to solve a puzzle he did not understand. "She trusts you," he said one afternoon when Catherine had fallen asleep after eating an entire bowl of soup, a victory Ivy had celebrated silently. "I don't understand why." "I'm not frightening," Ivy said simply. "Neither am I." Ivy looked at him, at the hard line of his jaw, the command in his posture, the way servants moved around him like water around stone. "You're a duke, Your Grace. Everything about you is meant to command respect. That's not the same as trust." He frowned. "I don't know how to be anything else. You could try being her grandson." Ivy gentled her voice. "Not her guardian, not her protector, just her family." Something vulnerable flickered across his face. "I don't remember how." The admission hung between them, raw and unguarded. Ivy's heart ached with understanding. "She doesn't need you to be perfect," she said softly. "She just needs you to be present." He was silent for a long moment. Then, "Will you teach me?" The question caught Ivy off guard. "Teach you?" "How to be present, how to speak to her the way you do." He met her eyes. "Please." It was the second time he had said please to her. The second time he had stripped away his authority and asked simply, as a man who needed help. Ivy nodded. "All right." Over the following days she showed him, small things, how to hold Catherine's hand without gripping too tightly, how to offer food without demanding she eat, how to sit in silence without filling it with nervous chatter. The Duke, Nathaniel, as he'd quietly asked Ivy to call him when they were alone with Catherine, was a surprisingly quick study. His hands, used to holding ledgers and signing orders, learned gentleness. His voice, accustomed to commands, learned softness. And Catherine began to respond, not with words, but with the way her eyes followed Nathaniel around the room, the way her fingers tightened around his when he held her hand, the way she leaned into him just slightly when he sat beside her bed. "She's coming back," Nathaniel said one evening, wonder threading through his voice. "Just a little. But she's coming back." "She never left," Ivy corrected gently. "She was just lost. And now you're helping her find her way home." He looked at Ivy then with an expression that made her breath catch. Gratitude mixed with something deeper, something she did not dare name. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to." Ivy stood, suddenly aware of how small the room felt, how close they were standing. "I should check on Liam." She fled before he could respond, her heart racing with feelings she had no right to entertain. But the next morning, when she arrived at Catherine's room, she found Nathaniel already there, and Liam with him. Her son was sitting on the edge of Catherine's bed, chattering away about the garden cat, while Nathaniel held a breakfast tray, and Catherine's eyes sparkled with something that looked like joy. "Mama!" Liam beamed. "The Duke said I could help feed the Duchess. Is that all right?" Ivy's throat tightened. "If His Grace says it's all right, then yes." "She seems to like him," Nathaniel said, a small smile playing at his lips. "He has a talent for storytelling. He gets that from his father." The words slipped out before Ivy could stop them, carrying grief she thought she'd buried. Nathaniel's expression softened. He would be proud of him. "And of you." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Ivy blinked back tears and moved to help, but Nathaniel gestured for her to sit. "Let him," he said quietly. "He's doing well." So Ivy sat and watched her son, her beautiful, bright, resilient son, coax the Dowager Duchess to eat porridge, while chattering about cats and gardens and the really big horse he'd seen in the stable. And she watched Nathaniel watch them both, his expression unguarded, in a way she suspected few people ever saw. Something was shifting. Between her and Nathaniel. Between all of them. Something fragile and terrifying and impossible to stop. Ivy told herself it didn't matter, this was temporary. A month, maybe 2, and then she and Liam would return to their real lives. But in the quiet moments, when Nathaniel smiled at something Liam said, or when his hand brushed hers as they both reached for Catherine's water glass, Ivy felt the dangerous whisper of hope that perhaps real life could be something different than what she'd always believed possible. She buried that hope as quickly as it surfaced. Hope was a luxury she could not afford, but it kept growing anyway, stubborn and unrelenting, like wildflowers through cracked stone. 3 weeks into their stay, disaster struck in the form of a broken vase. Liam had been exploring, as he was constantly doing, and had ventured into a sitting room he'd been told was off limits. Ivy had been with Catherine, coaxing her through afternoon tea, when she heard the crash. She ran her heart in her throat, and found Liam standing in the center of a room filled with priceless antiques, his face white with terror, shattered porcelain scattered around his feet. "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Mama, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to—" "It's all right." Ivy pulled him close, her mind racing through consequences. A vase like that could cost more than she'd earn in years. Mr. Dalton would have dismissed her on the spot for less. "What happened?" Nathaniel's voice cut through Ivy's panic. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, his face unreadable. "Your Grace, I'm so sorry." Ivy kept her arms around Liam, as though she could shield him from whatever punishment was coming. "He didn't mean—" "We'll pay for it somehow, I'll work—" "Liam," Nathaniel said, ignoring Ivy entirely. He crouched down, meeting Liam's tear-filled eyes. "Are you hurt?" Liam shook his head mutely. "Good. That's what matters." Nathaniel glanced at the shattered vase. "This belonged to my great-uncle. He was, by all accounts, a thoroughly unpleasant man who collected ugly things to prove he was wealthy. I never liked this vase." Liam's eyes widened. You didn't." "Absolutely hideous. You've done me a favor, really. Now I have an excuse not to display it." Nathaniel stood and called for a servant. "Charles, please clean this up, and make sure no one walks through here barefoot." "Your Grace," Ivy started. "It's porcelain, Mrs. Brennan. It can be replaced." His eyes met hers. "Children cannot." The words struck her like a physical blow, not with pain, but with the force of unexpected grace. "But the cost—" "I don't care about the cost." His voice was firm. "Liam is welcome in this house, all of it. Even the rooms we told him not to enter because he's 8, and curiosity is not a crime." Liam looked up at Nathaniel with something approaching worship. "Really? Really?" Nathaniel ruffled Liam's hair with startling familiarity, though perhaps next time ask before exploring. "I'll give you a proper tour so you don't have to sneak around." "You will?" Liam's face lit up. "I will. Tomorrow morning if your mother agrees." Ivy could only nod, her throat too tight for words. That evening, after Liam had fallen asleep, still chattering about the nice Duke, Ivy found Nathaniel in the library. He was staring into the fire, a glass of brandy in his hand, his expression distant. "Thank you," she said quietly from the doorway. "For today. You didn't have to—" "Yes, I did." He looked up, firelight catching in his dark eyes. "He's a child. A good one, who has been taught not to touch things that don't belong to him. The fact that he was curious enough to explore despite that speaks to intelligence, not malice. Most people wouldn't see it that way. Most people are fools." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, please." Ivy hesitated, keenly aware of propriety and her place and all the reasons she should refuse, but she was tired of pretending she did not want to know this man better. She sat. "Catherine smiled today," Nathaniel said after a moment. When Liam was reading to her, a real smile. I haven't seen that in 3 years. He has that effect on people. Ivy's voice softened. He reminds them that joy still exists. You've raised him well. I've done my best. Ivy looked down at her hands. It hasn't always been enough. It has been more than enough. Nathaniel's voice was firm. He is kind, curious, resilient. Those are not qualities that come from nothing. They come from being loved well. The words settled around Ivy's heart like a balm to wounds she'd carried for years. Thank you, she whispered. They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them, and Ivy felt something shift deeper. This was not a duke and a shopgirl. This was two people who understood loneliness and responsibility, and the terror of loving someone you could not protect from the world's cruelty. My mother doesn't approve, Nathaniel said suddenly, of you being here, of Liam, of how much time I spend with Catherine now. Ivy's stomach dropped. I haven't met her. No, she's been away at her sister's estate. He took a drink. She returns in 2 days. The way he said it carried warning. Ivy straightened. Should I be concerned? My mother believes Catherine is... He stopped, jaw clenching. She believes my grandmother is a burden, an embarrassment, something to be hidden away. That's cruel. Yes. The word was flat. It is. Ivy thought of the Dowager Duchess's hollow eyes, of how lost she'd been on that street. Your Grace, Nathaniel, how did Catherine end up outside my shop? His face went hard. I don't know. She disappeared from the estate 3 weeks before you found her. The servant said she walked into the gardens one morning and never came back. We searched for days. How did she get to London? I don't know that either. Frustration threaded through his voice. She had no money, no identification. Someone must have helped her. Or... He stopped. Or what? Or someone left her there. His eyes met Ivy's, dark with suspicion he clearly did not want to voice. On purpose. The implications hung heavy between them. Ivy's mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. You think someone in your household? I don't know what to think. Nathaniel set down his glass with careful precision. But I intend to find out. 2 days later, the Duchess of Ravenscroft returned. Ivy was reading to Catherine when the woman swept into the room, like a storm given human form. She was beautiful in the way sharp things are beautiful, cold and cutting and impossible to touch without drawing blood. So, the Duchess said, her eyes raking over Ivy with open disdain. This is the shopgirl you've installed in the family wing. Ivy stood quickly, dropping into a curtsy. Your Grace. Don't. The Duchess's voice cracked like a whip. Don't pretend this is anything other than what it is. Mother. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, his voice carefully controlled. You're back early. I heard the most interesting rumors, darling. The Duchess smiled without warmth. That you'd brought a woman and her child to live here, that you'd been spending all your time attending to that woman instead of managing the estate. I simply had to see for myself. Mrs. Brennan is caring for grandmother. How charitable of her. The Duchess moved closer to Catherine's bed, looking down at the old woman with undisguised contempt. And has the old woman started speaking yet, or is she still playing her little games? She's not playing games, Ivy said before she could stop herself. She's suffering from a condition. Oh, the shop girl has medical expertise now? The Duchess's laugh was blade sharp. How versatile. That's enough. Nathaniel's voice dropped into something dangerous. You will not speak to Mrs. Brennan that way. I will speak however I please in my own home. The Duchess turned her cold gaze on Ivy. How you've done well for yourself, haven't you? Found a way to secure a position by exploiting an old woman's illness and a lonely man's guilt. I've done no such thing. Haven't you? The Duchess stepped closer. Tell me, Mrs. Brennan, how much is my son paying you to play nursemaid? Enough to make it worth enduring his grandmother's unpleasantness. I don't find her unpleasant. Ivy's voice shook with fury. I find her lonely and frightened and deserving of basic human dignity, which is more than you seem capable of providing. The slap came so fast, Ivy barely saw it. Pain exploded across her cheek, and she staggered back, her hand flying to her face. Mother. Nathaniel crossed the room in 2 strides, his face white with rage. "Get out! Don't you dare speak to me that way! Get out!" Each word was carved from ice. "Now!" The Duchess drew herself up, fury and shock warring on her face. "You would choose this woman over your own mother? I would choose basic human decency over cruelty. Yes." Nathaniel positioned himself between his mother and Ivy. "Leave." The Duchess's face twisted with rage. She swept from the room, her exit punctuated by a slammed door that rattled the walls. Nathaniel turned to Ivy immediately. "Let me see. I'm fine. You're not fine. She struck you." His hands hovered near Ivy's face, careful not to touch without permission. "May I?" Ivy nodded mutely. His fingers were gentle as they tilted her chin, examining the red mark already blooming across her cheek. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "She had no right. It's not your fault. She's my mother. Her behavior is my responsibility." His jaw clenched. "I should have warned you. Should have protected you." "You did protect me." Ivy met his eyes. "You chose me over her." Something passed between them then, a recognition of what that choice meant, of the line Nathaniel had just crossed and could not uncross. Behind them, Catherine made a sound. They both turned. The Dowager Duchess was sitting up, actually sitting up, and her eyes were fixed on Ivy's injured cheek. Her face was twisted with distress, and her hand reached out, trembling, toward Ivy. "Oh, Catherine." Ivy moved to her immediately, taking her hand. "I'm all right. It's just a little mark." Catherine's lips moved, shaping words that would not come. Tears spilled down her weathered cheeks. "She's trying to speak," Nathaniel said hoarsely. "For the first time in 3 years, she's trying—" But Catherine's frustration was too great. She pulled Ivy's hand to her own cheek, then pointed at Ivy's, then at the door where the younger Duchess had exited. The message was clear. She had seen. She understood. And she was trying, desperately, to say something. "I know," Ivy soothed, sitting on the bed and gathering Catherine's hands in hers. "I know you want to help, but you don't have to speak to tell me you care. I can see it." Catherine's tears fell harder. She pressed Ivy's hand to her heart, then to her own lips, as though trying to transfer the words she could not say. Nathaniel watched with something like awe on his face. "She's protecting you." "Yes." Ivy's own tears threatened. "She is." And in that moment, with a duke's grandmother clinging to her hands and a duke standing guard beside them both, Ivy realized that she had somehow become part of something she'd never expected. A family. But families, she knew, could be destroyed as easily as they were built. And the woman who had just struck her was not finished. The Duchess did not leave the estate. Instead, she established herself like an invading army, commandeering the drawing room, summoning servants with increasingly imperious demands, and making her displeasure known to everyone within earshot. Ivy heard the whispers from the maids. "Duchess says the widow is taking advantage. Duchess says she'll be dismissed within the week. Duchess says the boy broke 3 vases, not 1, and cost a fortune." Liam, sensitive to tension in ways children often are, became quiet. He stopped exploring, stopped asking questions, stayed close to Ivy's side as though afraid to be noticed. "Don't let her silence you," Ivy told him one evening as she tucked him into bed. "You've done nothing wrong. The servants say the mean lady wants us gone." Ivy's heart cracked. "The mean lady doesn't make the rules." "But what if she makes the nice duke send us away?" "He won't." Ivy smoothed Liam's hair back, praying she was telling the truth. "He promised we'd be safe here." But promises, she knew, were fragile things, especially when tested by people with power. Nathaniel was gone more often now, called away to manage estate business his mother insisted he'd been neglecting. When he was present, he was tense, the ease that had begun to develop between him and Ivy replaced by careful formality. Only with Catherine did he let his guard down. He sat with her every evening, reading aloud or simply holding her hand, his voice soft with affection. "He was always like this," one of the older servants told Ivy one afternoon. "When he was a boy, his mother wanted him strong, wanted him commanding, but the Dowager Duchess, she let him be gentle, Let him be curious and kind. The Duchess never forgave her for it. Why not? Ivy asked. Because gentleness looks like weakness to people who only understand cruelty. The words haunted Ivy. She watched Nathaniel navigate his mother's demands, watched him bend and compromise and slowly lose the softness he'd been rediscovering. 1 week after the Duchess's return, Ivy found her in Catherine's room. The Dowager Duchess was asleep, her afternoon rest undisturbed. The younger Duchess stood over her bed, her expression unreadable as she stared at the sleeping woman. "Your Grace," Ivy said quietly from the doorway, "may I help you with something?" The Duchess turned, her eyes cold. "I'm simply checking on my mother-in-law. Surely that's not forbidden." "Of course not." Ivy entered slowly, every instinct screaming warning. "She's been resting well today." How convenient. The Duchess moved away from the bed, her silk skirts rustling. "Tell me, Mrs. Brennan, do you ever wonder how she ended up on that filthy street outside your shop?" Ivy's pulse quickened. "Every day. Perhaps she wandered off. Perhaps she was confused." The Duchess's smile was knife-sharp. Or perhaps someone finally had enough of caring for a useless old woman who contributes nothing but difficulty. The implication hung in the air like poison. Ivy forced herself to remain calm. "Catherine is not useless." "Isn't she?" The Duchess stepped closer. "She doesn't speak. She doesn't manage household affairs. She simply exists, demanding attention and resources that could be better spent elsewhere. She's a human being who deserves dignity and care. How noble of you." The Duchess's voice dripped with contempt. "But nobility doesn't pay bills, does it? Nobility doesn't maintain estates or preserve legacies. It just creates burdens for those of us forced to carry them. Is that why you left her there?" The question escaped before Ivy could stop it. "Because you saw her as a burden?" The Duchess's face went white, then red with fury. "You have no proof of such a vile accusation. I didn't accuse you of anything. I asked a question." Ivy's voice remained steady despite her racing heart. "But your reaction is rather telling. You forget yourself, Mrs. Brennan." The Duchess advanced, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You are nothing, a widow from a shop, here on my son's misplaced charity. One word from me and you'll be back in whatever hovel you crawled from." "Mother, that's enough." Nathaniel stood in the doorway, his face carved from stone. Behind him stood Liam, his eyes wide with fear, and 2 housemaids who'd clearly been summoned as witnesses. The Duchess whirled. "Nathaniel, this woman just accused me of—" "I heard what she accused you of." His voice was deadly quiet. "And I'd like to hear your answer." "How dare you? Answer the question, Mother." Nathaniel moved into the room, positioning himself between Ivy and his mother. "Did you have anything to do with Grandmother's disappearance? This is absurd. I won't dignify such—" "Mrs. Peters," Nathaniel addressed one of the maids, "please repeat what you told me an hour ago." The older maid trembled but spoke clearly. "I saw Her Grace, the Duchess, arguing with the Dowager Duchess the morning she disappeared. The Dowager was already dressed for walking, but in very plain clothes, not her usual attire." "And?" Nathaniel prompted. "And I heard Her Grace say, 'If you won't go willingly to the country house, then you'll go another way.'" The maid's voice shook. "The Dowager looked frightened, Your Grace, truly frightened." "That proves nothing," the Duchess snapped. "I was suggesting she needed rest, away from—" "Sarah?" Nathaniel looked at the younger maid. "I helped the Dowager into the carriage that morning, Your Grace. Her Grace ordered me to remove all identification from the Dowager's person, her jewelry, her calling cards, even the embroidered initials on her handkerchief. Said it was for her own protection, but—" The girl's voice dropped. It didn't feel right. The Duchess's face twisted with rage and something darker, fear of being exposed. "These servants are lying. They're conspiring to—" "No." The single word from Nathaniel cut through her protests like a blade. "They're telling the truth. I can see it, and so can you." Silence crashed through the room. Catherine, awakened by the commotion, sat up in bed, her eyes moving between her grandson and his mother with sharp awareness. "How you took her?" Nathaniel continued, his voice breaking slightly. "You dressed her in plain clothes, removed anything that could identify her, and you left her somewhere hoping she'd be lost permanently, hoping she'd end up in a workhouse or worse, hoping she'd simply disappear so you wouldn't have to care for her anymore. She was making your life difficult. The Duchess's composure shattered. She was taking your attention away from your duties, from the estate, from everything that actually matters. I did it for you, Nathaniel. To free you from... To free me? His voice rose with barely controlled fury. You tried to kill my grandmother to free me. I didn't try to kill her, I simply relocated her. If she'd had any sense left, she would have found help. The fact that she couldn't proves my point. She's not fit to be part of this family anymore. Catherine made a sound then, a low, wounded cry that cut through every heart in the room. Her hands clutched at the bedclothes, her body trembling with the force of emotions she could not voice. Ivy moved without thinking, gathering Catherine into her arms as the old woman began to weep. It's all right, she murmured. You're safe now. You're safe. Get away from her, the Duchess hissed at Ivy. This is your fault. You've turned my son against me with your common manipulation. Enough! Nathaniel's shout echoed off the walls. Liam whimpered and pressed against the doorframe. You will pack your things and leave this estate within the hour. You are no longer welcome here. I am your mother. You are a woman who abandoned a helpless elderly person to die alone and afraid. His voice shook. You are not fit to be called mother. Not to me. Not to anyone. You'll regret this. The Duchess's face contorted with vicious rage. When society learns you've chosen a shopgirl and a dying old woman over your own family, then let them learn. Nathaniel's voice rang with finality. Let all of London know that I would rather be alone than share a home with someone capable of such cruelty. The Duchess stared at him for a long moment, disbelief and fury warring on her face. Then she swept from the room, her exit marked by a door slam that rattled the windows. In the silence that followed, Catherine's weeping continued, soft, broken sounds that spoke of years of fear and pain finally being released. Nathaniel dropped into the chair beside the bed, his face buried in his hands. His shoulders shook with suppressed emotion. Ivy looked at Liam, still frozen in the doorway. Sweetheart, why don't you go with Sarah to the kitchen? I think Cook was making honey cakes today. Liam nodded mutely, and the young maid led him away gently. Ivy continued to hold Catherine, rocking her slightly as she'd once rocked Liam through nightmares. Gradually, the old woman's sobs quieted. Her fingers found Ivy's hand and gripped with surprising strength. I'm so sorry, grandmother. Nathaniel's voice was raw. I should have known, should have protected you. Catherine released one of Ivy's hands and reached for Nathaniel. He took it immediately, his large fingers gentle around her frail ones. She's gone now, he continued. I promise you, she will never hurt you again. Catherine's lips moved, struggling to form words. Her frustration was palpable, her need to speak overwhelming. You don't have to say anything, Ivy said softly. We understand. But Catherine shook her head violently. Her lips continued moving, her throat working. And then, so quietly, Ivy almost missed it. Stay. The word was barely a whisper, cracked from years of disuse. But it was unmistakably a word. Nathaniel's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. Grandmother? Catherine's gaze fixed on Ivy. Stay, she repeated, slightly stronger. Her hand tightened around Ivy's. Please. Tears streamed down Ivy's face. I'm not going anywhere, she promised. I'm right here. Catherine's attention shifted to Nathaniel. Her lips trembled as she fought for more words. Good. Boy. Nathaniel made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. He pressed his grandmother's hand to his forehead. I love you, he said brokenly. I should have told you every day. Love, you. Catherine's voice was growing steadier with each word, as though a dam had broken and speech was flooding back. Both. Her eyes moved between Nathaniel and Ivy, her meaning clear. The air in the room felt charged with something Ivy could not name. She was suddenly acutely aware of Nathaniel's proximity, of his grandmother's hand linking them together, of the profound shift that had just occurred. I should let you both rest, Ivy said quietly, trying to extract her hand. Catherine held firm. No, stay. Grandmother needs you here, Nathaniel added, his eyes meeting Ivy's with an intensity that stole her breath. We both do. The words hung between them, layered with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge aloud. Ivy stayed. The following days brought chaos of a different kind. The Duchess's departure sent shockwaves through the household, and though the servants were clearly relieved, they also worried about the scandal that would inevitably follow. Nathaniel spent long hours in his study, managing the estate business his mother claimed he'd been neglecting. But every morning and evening he sat with Catherine, talking to her in the gentle way Ivy had taught him. And Catherine, miraculous Catherine, was speaking more each day. Short sentences at first, then longer ones. Her voice was rusty, her words sometimes tangled, but they were coming back. "You saved her," Nathaniel told Ivy one evening. They were sitting in Catherine's room while the old woman dozed. "Not just by feeding her, by treating her like she mattered. She does matter." Ivy looked at the sleeping woman with profound affection. "She always did. My mother made me believe—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "She made me believe that strength meant hardness, that caring too much was weakness. And now? Now I think she was wrong about everything." He looked at Ivy, his dark eyes reflecting firelight. "You've taught me more about strength in these weeks than she did in 35 years. Ivy's breath caught. "I haven't taught you anything, I've just been myself." "Exactly." His voice softened. "You've shown me what it looks like to be yourself without apology, to care without shame, to fight for what matters even when it costs you. It hasn't cost me anything. You've given me security, safety. It cost you the mark on your cheek from my mother's hand." His expression darkened. "It cost you every time the servants whisper or every time you worry about whether you belong here." Ivy looked away. He was right. The whispers had grown since the Duchess's departure. Not cruel, but uncertain. The staff didn't know what to make of a widowed shopgirl living in the family wing, dining with the Duke, caring for his grandmother as though she were family. "Do I belong here?" The question slipped out before Ivy could stop it. "Really? Do you want to?" Nathaniel's answer was immediate and intense. "Because if you do, then yes. Unequivocally, yes." "It's not that simple?" "Why not?" He leaned forward. "Why does it have to be complicated? You belong where you're wanted. And you are wanted here, by my grandmother, by the staff who've seen how you care for her, by—" He stopped. "By?" Ivy prompted, her heart hammering. "By me." The words were quiet, but firm. "You're wanted here by me, Ivy." The use of her given name, the raw honesty in his voice, the way he was looking at her, it was too much, too dangerous. "You're grateful," Ivy said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Because I helped Catherine. But that's not the same as—" "Don't," he cut her off gently. "Don't diminish this. Don't make it smaller than it is." "What is it then?" Ivy's voice trembled. "What are you saying?" He was silent for a long moment. Then, "I'm saying that somewhere between watching you feed my grandmother and listening to you talk to your son and seeing you stand up to my mother without flinching, I started to care about you, as more than someone I hired, as more than a companion for Catherine." "Nathaniel, I'm saying that when I think about the future now, you're in it. You and Liam. Not as guests, not as employees, as family." The word struck Ivy's chest like a blow. Family. The thing she'd been afraid to hope for. The thing that seemed impossible. "I'm a widow with a child," she said desperately. "I worked in a shop. I have no connections, no dowry, no—" "I don't care." His voice was fierce. "None of that matters to me. It matters to the world. Then the world can go to hell." He reached for her hand, stopped himself before touching her. "I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. I'm just asking you to stop telling yourself you don't belong here. Because you do, Ivy. In every way that matters." Catherine stirred then, her eyes opening. She looked at them both and a small smile curved her lips. "Stubborn," she said, her voice still rough but clear. "Both stubborn." Nathaniel laughed, the tension breaking. "She's right. She usually is," Ivy said softly. Catherine's smile widened. She reached for both their hands, placing them together with deliberate care. "Good. Together." Ivy's face flamed. "Catherine, hush." The old woman's eyes sparkled with something like mischief. "I'm old. Earned right to meddle." Nathaniel's hand was warm around Ivy's. His thumb brushed across her knuckles in a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "You have earned that right," he agreed, his eyes never leaving Ivy's face, "though I'm not sure we need the meddling." "Speak for yourself," Ivy muttered, but she didn't pull her hand away. Catherine's satisfied expression suggested she knew exactly what she'd accomplished. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of gradual transformation. Catherine continued to improve, speaking more each day, even venturing out of bed to sit in the garden with Ivy and Liam. Her voice was still weak, her words sometimes tangled, but her presence was increasingly vibrant. Liam adored her. He read to her every afternoon, his young voice earnest as he stumbled through adventure stories. Catherine listened with rapt attention, occasionally interjecting comments that made Liam glow with pride. And Nathaniel was everywhere. He taught Liam to ride, the two of them spending hours in the paddock while Ivy watched from the fence, her heart full to bursting. He ate breakfast with them every morning, dinner every evening. He asked Ivy's opinion on estate matters, listened when she spoke, remembered small details she mentioned in passing. He was courting her, Ivy realized one morning, slowly, carefully, without pressure. He was showing her what life could be like if she chose to stay. And God help her, she was beginning to believe it was possible, but the world outside Ravenscroft Manor had not forgotten them. Rumours spread about the Duke's mother leaving in disgrace, about the mysterious widow living in his home, about the elderly Dowager Duchess who'd been found after weeks missing. Society began to take notice, and society, Ivy knew, could destroy as easily as it elevated. The reckoning came on a Tuesday afternoon. A carriage arrived bearing the Duke's aunt and 2 of her friends, society matrons with influence and opinions. They demanded entrance, were shown to the drawing room, and summoned Nathaniel with imperious authority. Ivy was in the garden with Catherine and Liam when the housekeeper found her. "His Grace requests your presence in the drawing room, Mrs. Brennan." Ivy's stomach dropped. "Why?" The housekeeper's expression was sympathetic. "The ladies wish to speak with you about your position here." Catherine's hand tightened on Ivy's arm. "No," she said firmly. "Don't let them. It's all right." Ivy squeezed her hand. "I'll be fine." But as she walked toward the drawing room, her heart hammered with dread. This was it, the moment where her impossible situation would be exposed and dismantled by people with power to do so. Nathaniel met her in the hallway outside. "You don't have to do this," he said urgently. "I can send them away. That will only make things worse." Ivy straightened her shoulders. "I've done nothing wrong. I have nothing to hide." "I know that. But they—" He stopped, frustration clear on his face. "They won't see it that way." "Then I'll help them see it." Ivy's voice was steadier than she felt. "Trust me." Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, perhaps, or admiration. "Always," he said quietly. They entered together. 3 women sat in stiff-backed chairs, their faces arranged in identical expressions of disapproving curiosity. The aunt, Lady Ashworth, spoke first. "So this is the young woman causing such scandal." Ivy curtsied, keeping her expression neutral. "Lady Ashworth, how may I help you?" "You may explain yourself." Lady Ashworth's voice was cold. "My sister writes that you've bewitched my nephew, that you've turned him against his own mother through manipulation and schemes." "That's not true." Ivy kept her voice calm. "I've done nothing but care for the Dowager Duchess. That's why I was brought here. And yet you've installed yourself and your child in the family wing. You dine with His Grace as though you were an equal. You've somehow convinced my mother to speak after years of silence." Lady Ashworth leaned forward. "That seems rather convenient, doesn't it?" "Aunt Eleanor," Nathaniel said warningly, "you're speaking of someone who saved grandmother's life, or someone who saw an opportunity and exploited it brilliantly." One of the other women spoke up. "Come now, Your Grace. Surely you see how this looks. A pretty widow, a sympathetic child, a vulnerable elderly woman. It's a perfect recipe for entrapment." Ivy's hands clenched at her sides. "I have entrapped no one." "Haven't you?" Lady Ashworth stood, moving closer with predatory grace. Tell me, Mrs. Brennan, what were your circumstances before you came here? I worked in a modiste shop. I supported my son as best I could. And now you live in luxury, with a duke at your beck and call. Quite an improvement. I didn't ask for any of this, Ivy said, her voice rising despite her attempts at control. His Grace asked me to help his grandmother. That's all. And you expect us to believe you have no designs on securing a more permanent position? The third woman's laugh was cruel. You may have charmed Nathaniel, but we are not so easily fooled. Enough. Nathaniel's voice cracked through the room like thunder. You will not speak to Mrs. Brennan this way in my home. We're trying to protect you, Lady Ashworth insisted, from a woman who clearly sees you as a prize to be won. The only woman who saw me as a prize to be won was my mother. Nathaniel's voice was cold, and we all know how that ended. Your mother was trying to preserve your position, your legacy. My mother tried to abandon her own mother-in-law to die alone on the streets. The words fell like stones. And I will not stand here and listen to you defend her actions or attack someone who has shown more compassion and integrity than anyone in this family. Silence crashed through the room. The three women stared at Nathaniel with varying expressions of shock and disapproval. You would stake your reputation on this woman? Lady Ashworth asked finally. Yes. Nathaniel moved to stand beside Ivy, his presence solid and unwavering. Without hesitation. Then you're a fool. Lady Ashworth gathered her skirts. When this all falls apart, and it will, don't expect the family to help you pick up the pieces. I won't need your help. His voice was firm. I have everything I need right here. The women left in a flurry of offended dignity. The door closed behind them, and Ivy sagged against the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. I'm so sorry, she whispered. You just alienated your entire family because of me. No. Nathaniel crouched in front of her, taking her hands in his. I alienated them because they were wrong, because they were cruel, because they couldn't see what I see when I look at you. And what do you see? Ivy's voice broke on the question. Strength, kindness. A woman who feeds strangers because she can't bear to see them suffer. A mother who fights for her son's future. Someone who looks at a silent old woman and sees not a burden, but a person worthy of love. His hands tightened around hers. I see the woman I want beside me, not as a convenience, not as a scandal, as my partner, my equal, my choice. Tears spilled down Ivy's cheeks. Nathaniel, I'm not. If you tell me one more time that you're not enough, I'm going to be very cross. His voice gentled. You are more than enough, Ivy. You always have been. Society will destroy you for choosing me. Then let it try. He raised one hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away her tears. I spent 35 years letting other people dictate what I should want, who I should be, what mattered. I'm done with that. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing what I want. And I want you. What if it's too much? Ivy whispered. What if the scandal hurts Liam? Then we'll protect him. Together. Nathaniel's eyes were steady. I can't promise the world will be kind, but I can promise I will fight for you, for him, for us, every single day. The door burst open. Catherine stood there leaning heavily on her cane, with Liam hovering anxiously beside her. Finally, Catherine said, her voice stronger than Ivy had ever heard it. Thought, I'd have to hit you both with this stick. Nathaniel laughed, the sound bright with surprised joy. Grandmother, you shouldn't be walking. Nonsense! Catherine moved forward with determination. Not missing this. She looked at Ivy, her eyes fierce with affection. You love him? Ivy's breath caught. Catherine's voice softened. I want to see you happy, both of you. You're not dying, Nathaniel protested. We're all dying, some faster than others. Catherine moved closer, placing one hand on Nathaniel's shoulder and one on Ivy's. I was lost. You both found me, found each other. Her eyes glistened with tears. Don't waste this. Life's too short. Nathaniel looked at Ivy, and in his eyes she saw everything she'd been afraid to hope for. Love, partnership, home. Ivy Brennan. he said quietly, as though they were alone, as though Catherine and Liam weren't watching with rapt attention. "Will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband and Liam's father, and spend every day proving that you made the right choice?" The world narrowed to his face, to the question hanging between them, to the future stretching out like an open road. Every rational part of Ivy's mind screamed warnings. This was too fast, too impossible, too dangerous. But her heart, her stubborn, hopeful, exhausted heart, knew the truth. "Yes," she said, the word carrying 4 years of grief and fear and desperate hope. "Yes." Nathaniel pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she was something precious, something he'd been searching for his entire life. Catherine made a satisfied sound. "Good. Now, let's have some cake." Liam's confused voice broke through the moment. "Are you going to be my papa now?" Nathaniel released Ivy and turned to Liam, crouching to meet him at eye level. "I'd like to be, if you'll have me." Liam studied him seriously. "Will you teach me more about horses?" "Every day." "And can I still read to the Duchess?" "Absolutely." "Okay then." Liam's face split into a grin. "You can be my papa." Nathaniel's eyes closed briefly, emotion playing across his face. When he opened them, he pulled Liam into an embrace that made Ivy's heart crack open completely. This was real. This was happening. This was hers. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the estate's private chapel, a small affair with only the servants, a handful of close friends who didn't care about scandal, and Catherine sitting in the front row with tears streaming down her face. Society was scandalized, of course. The Ton whispered and gossiped and predicted disaster. Lady Ashworth refused to attend, and several other family members sent their regrets with thinly veiled disapproval. Ivy didn't care. She stood beside Nathaniel in a simple cream dress, Liam standing proud beside them as a witness, and spoke vows that felt more sacred than any society's approval. "I promise to see you," she said quietly. "Always. Not as a title or a position, but as the man who learned to be gentle, who fought for his grandmother, who chose love over propriety." "I promise to choose you," Nathaniel replied, his voice thick with emotion, "every day in every way until my last breath." When he kissed her, the small congregation erupted in applause. Catherine's voice rose above the rest. Finally! The celebration was modest. Dinner in the family dining room, dancing in the library where Nathaniel had first asked Ivy to stay. Toasts that made Ivy laugh and cry in equal measure. Late that evening, after Liam had been tucked into bed, still chattering excitedly about Mama's wedding, Ivy found Catherine in her room. "Come in, child," the old woman said. Her speech had continued to improve, though she still paused between words sometimes. "Sit with me." Ivy sat on the edge of the bed, taking Catherine's hand. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything. You saved me." Catherine's grip tightened. "When I was lost, when I couldn't speak, you made me human again. You were always human, not to her." Catherine's expression darkened. "My daughter-in-law saw me as obstacle, something to remove. She'll never hurt you again." Ivy's voice was fierce. "I won't let her." "I know," Catherine smiled. "You're fierce like I was once. Before I forgot how." "You didn't forget. You just couldn't show it. Maybe." Catherine's eyes drifted toward the window, where moonlight painted the garden silver. "I was frightened for so long, trapped inside my own mind, screaming where no one I could hear." "I'm so sorry." Ivy's throat tightened. "Don't be. You heard me." Catherine looked back at her. "Even when I couldn't speak, you heard what I needed, what I was trying to say." "Because I've been lost too," Ivy admitted quietly. "After my husband died, I felt like I was screaming in silence, working, surviving, caring for Liam, but never really living, just existing. And now? Now I feel alive again." Ivy's smile was watery, terrified but alive. "Good." Catherine patted her hand. "Alive means you can still feel, still hope, Still love. Her eyes twinkled. Still make great-grandchildren for me to spoil. Ivy's face flamed. Catherine, I'm old, earned, right to say what I want. She laughed, the sound still rusty but genuine. Besides, Liam needs siblings. He's too serious. For an only child. He gets that from me. And he'll learn. Joy from you too. From all of us. Catherine's expression sobered. You've given me back my family. My grandson knows how to love now. Knows what matters. Because of you. He always knew. He just needed permission to show it. Then you gave him that permission. That's a gift. Greater than any title or fortune. Catherine yawned, exhaustion creeping across her face. I'm tired now, but happy. So, very happy. Ivy tucked the blankets around her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Rest well. You too. Tell my grandson to be gentle with you, but not too gentle. Catherine's smile was wicked. You're stronger than you look. Ivy left laughing, her heart full. Nathaniel was waiting in the hallway, leaning against the wall with his cravat loosened and his hair disheveled. Is she settled? Yes, and full of inappropriate advice. His laugh was warm. She does enjoy meddling now that she has her voice back. I don't mind. Ivy moved closer, suddenly shy despite the ring on her finger. Nathaniel? Yes? I'm scared. The admission came out in a whisper. Of failing you, of not being enough for this life, of... He silenced her with a kiss, gentle and thorough, and full of promise. When he pulled back, his eyes were fierce. You are enough, you will always be enough. His hands framed her face. And when you're scared, you tell me. We face it together. That's what partners do. Together, Ivy repeated, testing the word. It felt like hope, like home. Together, he confirmed. He led her to their chamber now, not his alone, and closed the door gently behind them. The fire burned low, casting warm shadows across the room. We don't have to... Nathaniel started. I want to, Ivy interrupted. I'm nervous, but I want this. I want you. His smile was tender. Then we have all the time in the world, and in the quiet of that room, with patience and care and whispered words of love, they began the next chapter of their story. Epilogue. 1 year later, Ivy stood in the garden watching Liam race across the lawn, with his new sister toddling after him as fast as her chubby legs could carry her. Catherine sat nearby in her favourite chair, calling encouragement and laughing when Liam swooped back to scoop up little Margaret before she could tumble. So they're going to exhaust themselves, Nathaniel said, wrapping his arms around Ivy from behind. They're going to exhaust her, Ivy corrected, leaning into his warmth. Liam has endless energy. He's happy. They both are. Nathaniel's voice was soft with contentment. So am I. Ivy turned in his arms, studying the face she'd come to know as well as her own. The lines of tension that had marked him a year ago were gone, replaced by laugh lines, and the ease of a man who'd finally learned to be himself. I never imagined this, she admitted. When I was feeding your grandmother outside that shop, terrified of being caught, I never imagined it would lead here. To happiness? To home? Ivy's throat tightened. I've spent so long just surviving, I forgot what it felt like to actually live. And now? Now I remember. She smiled. Every day, Catherine's voice carried across the garden. Liam, bring Margaret us before she eats out that flower. Nathaniel laughed and released Ivy to rescue their daughter from her botanical exploration. Ivy watched him swing Margaret into the air, her delighted giggles floating back on the breeze. Catherine caught Ivy's eye and patted the chair beside her. Ivy settled into it, taking the old woman's hand. Thank you, Catherine said, her voice still soft but clear now. For saving all of us. I didn't save anyone, I just fed a woman who was hungry. You fed my soul, my grandson's heart, your own future. Catherine squeezed her hand. Sometimes the simplest acts of kindness change everything. I was so afraid, Ivy confessed, every day in the beginning. Afraid of being discovered, of losing my job, of not being enough for this world. And now? Ivy looked at her husband playing with their children, at the estate that had become her sanctuary, at the woman who'd become the grandmother she'd never had. Now I know that being enough isn't about titles or money or society's approval. It's about showing up, caring when it's difficult, choosing love even when it's scary. She smiled. You taught me that. We taught each other. Catherine's eyes glistened. I was lost. You found me. I helped you. Find yourself. That's what a family does, Liam's voice interrupted. Mama, Papa says we can have cake before dinner if you agree. Papa is getting bold with his bribes, Ivy called back. Papa is willing to negotiate, Nathaniel shouted, his grin visible even at a distance. Ivy laughed, the sound free and genuine. Fine, but small pieces, the children cheered. Catherine chuckled beside her, and Ivy felt something settle deep in her chest, a peace she'd stopped believing was possible. She had started by secretly feeding an old woman outside her shop, terrified of consequences, certain she was risking everything for nothing. She had ended with everything she'd never known to hope for. Stay, Catherine said softly, echoing that first word she'd spoken a year ago. Always stay. Always, Ivy promised, watching her family gather for their scandalously early cake. For the rest of my life, and she meant it with every fibre of her being. The end. You're the reason I write these stories, to remind you that kindness, even when it's terrifying, even when it costs you, is never wasted. That the smallest acts of compassion can change everything. That you deserve to be chosen, seen and loved, exactly as you are. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss another story of love, courage, and second chances. Until next time, remember, you are worthy of your own happy ending. Thank you for being here.